I wanted to talk. I know this doesn't go very well with food, but chocolate does. And social justice is a difficult subject, but I know that Rotary International is very much involved in it. So I put Rotary International on the front page. This is my nonprofit. It's called Project Hope and Fairness, and the tagline is helping African cocoa farmers. So I used to teach. I taught at Cal Poly for 17 years, and I used to teach an food anthropology class. And one of the things that struck me was I could teach the class either as a what class, where all you do is memorize facts about how people are different around the world and what they eat. Okay, but to me, it's much more interesting to teach why it is that the Swedes put a whole lot of egg yolks in their crepes and the French don't, or it's a lot of times it has to do with economics. A lot of times it just has to do with history. The French don't drink as much tea as the British, and that's because the British had a big blockade against the French for a long time. So there are reasons for why people eat what they eat, and that was what I wanted to do, was to basically learn about that and teach that to my students. And my students were nutrition students. So if you're a nutritionist and you start preaching to people how to treat their body better, and you don't understand culture and the importance of culture, then you're not going to do a good job. You're not going to be a good nutritionist. So that's why nutritionists need to be aware of why people are different, and and realize what are some of the limitations in trying to help people live a happier, longer life while enjoying their food. Because we all know if it tastes good, it's bad for you. Okay, that's like nutrition 101 first day, right? Anyway, so my whole thing was I became interested in the whole chocolate business, and I started a chocolate, my business, Mama Ganache Artisan Chocolates, in 2004. We started by just doing online sales. And then in 2009, we started renting our current space at 1445 Monterey, which is just down the road from my sister's restaurant, Splash. And my sister is a part owner in the chocolate business. My wife pretty much runs the front and a lot of the advertising, and I, in a typical female-male split, I do production. It's funny how gender works sometimes. But with Project Hope and Fairness, I'm sort of getting into both sides of, that is the marketing and the production. And then this is a new logo that I'll explain, a 7 Villages product, what that means. Now, if I can just, I hope I push the right button.
Good job.
Okay, so, you probably know that right now there's a big problem with what are called sub-Saharan Africans, SSA. That's the, when anthropologists talk about it. You have north of the Sahara, the Arabic countries, and you have south of the Sahara, all the other countries. And they're, Africa is the largest continent on the planet, and it has well over 50 countries on it. So when you say Africa, you're talking about a continent, not a country. And they're all different from each other. So, that's something I tried to explain to my students back when. I'm retired now, so I retired about a year and a half ago. Anyway, so one of the big problems that the world is facing is migration. Migration caused by global warming, migration caused by too much population, migration caused by a host of other factors. And one of the big migratory problems is the Mediterranean. And since January, over 2,500 people have drowned trying to get to Italy, basically, and many of them to work in food factories like Trader Joe's. So when you're eating a Trader Joe's pizza, which is manufactured in Italy, very good chance there's like more hundreds of sub-Saharan Africans working in that factory. So when you eat that pizza, you're participating in this whole migratory thing that's going on. And a lot of people are drowning. So that's the odds of dying coming to Europe by boat. And here's a picture of a boat capsizing and a piece of pizza. Anyway,
Sorry.
Now, that is one of our problems that we're facing today. Another problem that has become apparent since the year 2000, when a British couple published the first reports of child slavery in Ivory Coast. Now, American chocolate is 75% Ivorian. Okay, so when you buy chocolate here, you are participating in a problem that has been going on for quite a long time, and that problem is that children not being able to go to school and spending their childhoods working in chocolate. Some of them are slaves. If their parents were killed in a civil war, they might become slaves and work in certain chocolate farms. There's been a long history of slavery and child labor and worse forms of child labor in cacao, and it goes back a very long way. But these are some of the major, areas. So when the Spaniards started producing cacao in the 17th century, 16th century, they started with slaves. There were slaves all the way well into the 20th century, even though it was banned. There were still many slaves. Milton Hershey was one of the first people to really recognize the importance of treating your workers well. And Hershey, Pennsylvania, is a city that was built around the idea of cradle to grave, the company taking care of its workers. Okay, so that's capitalism, socialist style, and that was many people, especially Quakers, were very interested in the idea of the responsibility of a company toward its workers and going from cradle to grave. In 1906, there was you may know the brand name Cadbury. Cadbury was a major chocolate company owned by Quakers. And there were four major chocolate companies: Fry, Roundtree, Cadbury, and I forget the fourth one. And they were all competing with each other in the 19th century. In 1906, there was it got spilled that Cadbury was using slave-produced cacao from the islands of Sao Tome and Principe, which were their property of Portugal. And so that really became, there was a trial against the newspaper that spilled the beans on Cadbury. Cadbury looked really bad. They won the trial. They were awarded a farthing, which is much smaller than a penny, because the judge was saying, well, technically you're right. The newspaper did stretch things a bit, but really you're very much in the wrong. So he awarded them one farthing. But that was one of the, early efforts to make cacao not to get rid of slavery in cacao. And then in 2000, by the 1930s, over 60% of the world's cacao was produced in West Africa. Okay, so cacao is native to the Amazon River Basin. Okay, that's where it comes from. But it's a very high labor kind of thing, and it's hard to make money, and there's a lot of disease involved with the trees. So gradually it moved from South America, Central America, to Africa, and Africa became the world's major producer. And today, between East and West Africa, over 66% of the world's cacao comes from Africa. Okay, and another player is Indonesia, and there are many countries that are producing cacao, that are growing cacao around the world. The first reports of child slavery associated with American chocolate, the Harkins-Engel Protocol in 2001, which was to get a certification system in place so that when you buy Hershey, Mars, Nestle, there's an assurance that there was no worse forms of child labor or child slavery. Worst forms of child labor means children who are spraying the trees with chemicals and then become contaminated with these neurotoxins and starting their lives with poor health. And then also causing children to have to carry the cacao. So if the farmers can get a better price in Ghana than Ivory Coast, then the children start moving millions of pounds of cacao beans across the border from Ghana into Ivory Coast. So that's a typical use of children to move chocolate in order to get a better price. And then Harkins Engel, that was Tom Harkins, the senator from Iowa, and Elliot Engel is a congressman from Massachusetts. The two of them came up with this protocol, which was the major producing countries. That is Ivory Coast, number 1, 38% of the world's cacao. Ghana, number 2, 21% of the world's cacao. Nigeria, 6%, Cameroon, 6%. And a bunch of others, but West African, getting together and agreeing to conditions how to get rid of these problems so that we don't have to feel bad about eating our chocolate. Because not much was happening, the big guys, Mars, Hershey, they weren't making much progress. Okay, so there was still a lot of problems and documented problems, and so then the U.S. government spent $5 million on Tulane University to study the problem, and they did 6 reports and at the Payson Center for International Development at Tulane University. Anyway, so just to give you a little background, now I'm going to talk a little bit about a more pleasant subject, which is how chocolate is produced. And these are all my pictures of people that I work with. So this is the village of Abekro, and he's planting the tree. This is a tree growing in Edumfe, Ghana. This is picking a cocoa pod in that same village. This is Abekro, a pod open, and these are the seeds. This is the village of Manyaye in Ghana, fermenting their beans. That's the farmer. This is the village of Manyaye. They're in another year, and they're drying the beans. And very often children are involved in drying it. And if it starts to rain, they dry it on mats, and they just bring the mat up and put banana leaves on top to keep the rain from soaking into the beans and reversing the whole process. And then after drying, the beans are roasted. This is David. He is running the world's first chocolate factory in an African village. Okay, so I have raised the money for him to do that. I've raised over $25,000 just for that, and another $30,000 for a rice hulling center in his village, Depa. Okay, and I speak to David on my cell phone all the time, you know. So I mean, especially Facebook. He likes to talk Facebook. It's very hard to talk on the phone because his village often doesn't have service, and he has to go down to Abidjan, to the big city, to get service. And even then, if it's raining, the service is out. But anyway, we communicate all the time. That's the chief of the village, Chef Dede. I know him quite well. Been visiting that village since 2005. Then after roasting, you hull, you grind, then you make it, in this case with a machine called a mélangeur, and then you temper it and you pour it into molds. It's made with those beans. The white stuff is very pleasant. You pop that in your mouth and you have a very nice flavor. If you've ever had a cherimoya, which we grow here in California, there's a farmer in Santa Barbara, you can buy cherimoyas at Whole Foods. They're just about the best fruit I've ever had. There is very much like a cherimoya. The seeds aren't, but the white part is. What are some of the conditions? So the fact is that when you buy chocolate from the supermarket, you are participating in paying the worst salaries on planet Earth. Okay, the bottom quintile. So even if you're not talking about slavery, you're talking about very low wages. And there are 2.5 million cocoa farmers in West Africa producing our cacao for both Europe and the United States. There are, and they all earn approximately $500 a year. So it's less than $2 a day. Okay, so that's the bottom quintile as defined by the United Nations. So what are some of the solutions to this? The mass market solution is to certify. So I'll give you an example that I like to give. So if a farmer is maybe here's the retail bar, and what does the farmer make out of the one? Say the bar costs $1. How much does the farmer make? It's 1 cent. Okay, out of the dollar. The average American farmer makes 18 cents on the dollar. The average dairy farmer makes 40 cents on the dollar. The average lettuce farmer makes 4 cents on the dollar, because we don't value vegetables as much as we value meat and dairy. But it's still, the American farmer makes a lot more. And you probably know that there's the ag bill where farmers are basically given, they're paid, they get subsidies. They can't afford subsidies in countries like that we're talking about. So how do you get them out of this sort of rut? I call it the commodity trap. So the mass market solution is to certify. So 1 cent, okay, we'll double it to 2 cents, okay? So that's double, it's 2 times, wow. But 2 times 1 is 2, okay? That's not a big number, okay? So if they were to make their own chocolate and start manufacturing in the village, 50%, because wholesale is usually half of retail. So it would make 50%. Now, humanity went through this thing called the Ag Revolution 12,000 years ago, about 10,000 BC. That's when we started planting grains and stuff like that, and building banks and having militaries to protect our banks. That was the beginning of the Ag Revolution. It's 12,000 years that we've been in the Ag Revolution. All during that 12,000 years, the flow of money goes from the country to the city. The city always, I'm sure you saw the movie Chinatown. The city extracts resources from the country and gives very little back to the farmers. So the farmers always sort of scraping by. That's been the history of farming, farmers versus rural versus urban. What if farmers started actually manufacturing something? And because we live in a very modern state with highways and ways of moving things around, we could actually move that stuff around more efficiently, and then you have cell phones to communicate with each other. You could actually have a revolution where the farmers make a decent living. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? It'd be the first time in 12,000 years. Okay, and Africa would be a great place. Africa is a great place for solar too. They don't have PG&E to pay all the time and line their pockets. They can, they can just do solar. That's like revolutionary. So that's why I'm working there, and of course it's the bottom quintile. So these are all the certifications that you see: fair trade, UTZ, Rainforest Alliance, direct trade, and technology being a solution to inequities. But another one is what's called the bean to bar revolution, and that's happening as we speak here in the United States and all over the world. In Europe, it's happening in China, it's happening in Korea, it's happening everywhere, and that is small business people start making their own chocolate. That's a revolution in the chocolate business, because always chocolate making has been rich people with huge resources. I mean, Mars, Hershey, Nestle, they think nothing of spending $5 million on a machine. Little guys, like I buy a $550 mélange and I can make 5 pounds, and I have to sell it for a lot of money, but I'm providing a service that you can't get through the big guys. So always the story of small business is how to compete with the big guys, not on their turf, but find your own turf where you can actually make a buck. Well, the same thing in Ivory Coast. So, trying to get people to do it in the village, and then they start having their own little brand, and who knows what will happen. Anyway, the bean to bar revolution, that's one of the revolutions, and that's it's an important trend with small American chocolate makers. And for example, Dandelion in San Francisco, they're making they're 100% bean to bar. I do bean to bar, but I'm like 1% bean to bar. Most of my chocolate I'm buying from an Italian company. They're bringing the beans from Peru and Ecuador all the way to Italy, and then bringing it all the way back. And I'm buying that, and it's an excellent chocolate. But and this fair trade organic. But I do I'm trying to push the whole bean to bar thing. I think it's a great idea. And you will be, if you come by on the first Friday of every month on the Art After Dark, walking down Monterey Street, and there's lots of nice businesses to visit the art, and we have artwork on our walls. And then I'm standing there, and I'm giving out samples of chocolate free, and glasses of wine, little sips of wine free. Okay, so you can actually taste chocolate and wine together, and you start to realize, wow, I knew that Pinot Noir was different from Cab, and I knew that Cab was different from Merlot, but I didn't know that, Tanzania makes a damn good bean. That's East Africa, and Madagascar and Mexico, the home of chocolate. The word chocolate is a Mayan word, chocolatl, Xociolatl, and that's in the Chiapas region, which is right on the border with Guatemala. And we make that chocolate. It's fantastic. Okay, so they're all different. It has this intense chocolatiness with a cinnamon note. You don't get that in the other ones. They're all different from each other. So you can add value, and instead of thinking of chocolate as a vehicle for getting calories, instead think of chocolate as a vehicle for pleasure. And not pleasure of, making your pancreas happy and your hypothalamus happy, but pleasure in terms of, I like that flavor. That's really nice. So these are some people who are doing some work trying to connect small chocolate makers in the United States with farmers around the world. This is a company called Yellow Seed. And then I buy from this guy, chocolatealchemy.com. His name is John Nancy. And I produce 19 different chocolates from 19 different countries. Beans. And now I just want to talk a little bit about what I do. So I established Project Hope and Fairness in 2006. In the beginning, I took students to different villages, and we talked to the farmers, and we would go to the big city, and we would buy tools. We would load up the car with machetes, boots, all kinds of raincoats, pickaxes, shovels, things that farmers need. And then we would bring it to the village, and of course that's the great way to introduce yourself. You never walk into a village without anything. So then the students can, talk to the farmers and learn. So I was an academic. My number one mission is to teach young people. Anyway, so we did a lot of that. Then I started to realize, that I really want to do more than just showing young people, because not too many people were that interested they were afraid of leaving the United States and all that kind of stuff. So, it was expensive. So I wanted to do more than just trips. And so as I started learning it during this whole process, I realized, it would be good if they started making their own chocolate. So that's how I got into building mini chocolate factories, and what's in your envelope there talks about the DEPA project, which is $2,000 from being finished. David is in Abidjan right now talking to the engineer. The engineer is a 65-year-old man who worked for the chocolate business all his life and knows how to make chocolate machinery. He's making small ones, to roast the beans in small batches. Okay, so it's an African machine. It's not a Swiss machine or an American machine. It's an African machine. It's very important, that if you want to give somebody a fishing rod, you don't give them a fishing rod to learn and teach them how to fish. You figure out how to have them make the fishing rod themselves. That whole metaphor is not finished. You need to finish it by saying, you don't provide the fishing rod. You provide knowledge. You work with people. You always go back. You don't just dump and run. That's a lot of NGOs have made that big mistake, and nothing happens when you dump and run. So you have to be friends. Don't be a stranger, as they say. Okay, so Cocoa Study Center. I haven't realized that yet. That my idea is to actually start a Cocoa Study Center in Cameroon. I have the building all promised and everything. And the idea was American students would come for 3 weeks and learn how to make chocolate, work with the cocoa farmers, and take classes in the local university. Building infrastructure, building bridges. We've dug 4 wells. The average bored well is $22,000. But if you dig a well, it's $2,000. Okay, so it's buying these giant $500,000 drill rigs, it's not a very sustainable way of getting water. Whereas if you do what they've been doing for the last 3,000 years, and you pay for them, and then they make the bricks and they brick the sides, that's much better. So that's what we do. The village, we just finished the village of Taitia. We redug their well because of global warming. They had a terrible drought. Their water well for 400 people went dry, and so we had to redig. It cost another $950 to go down farther and deepen the well. All they use is a little pickaxe this long and a plastic bucket from Walmart. Just a little plastic bucket on the end of a string, and two guys. And that's how they dig a well. Perfectly straight. It's unbelievable. Anyway, so another thing that I've been working on is this idea of the 7 villages concept, and the idea there is to import beans from 7 villages, and that's what I gave to you, was the 7 villages bar. And what I'm looking for, in order to do this, to actually accomplish it, that is import beans from 7 villages, make the bar, and sell it here. One of the big barriers is organic and fair trade. So most stores won't even touch anything that it doesn't have organic or fair trade certification. So then, that's not so good. So what I need to do is find like the Girl Scouts or Rotary International that will say, okay, you don't have to have fair trade organic, because we know it's fair trade. It's better than fair trade. It's 50%, not 2%. It's way better than fair trade. We don't need that little logo. And that's what I want to do, is to actually, and 25 cents from each bar would go back to build chocolate factories, to help people get out of this commodity trap. So that's the 7 villages concept. And these are the 7 villages that I worked with in Ivory Coast. So one of the ways we're going to work with villages is, first you give them a motorcycle that will haul agricultural products. It's $2,500. And they spend like half a year fixing it up, keeping it repaired, and depositing the money in a bank account. Okay? Once they prove that they can do that, then you go on to the next step, which would be in Pézouan right now. I just sent $4,500 3 weeks ago, and they've made these bricks. So Mathurin, who's a junior, an elementary school principal in Abidjan, and he's a very good writer. He's good at everything. He's very good at documentation, being systematic. As you might expect, a principal usually is pretty, intelligent, well-educated. So we have all the bricks, and I need about $1,100 to get the hardware to do the foundations and build the walls. DEPA, that's the rice hulling center. The average African woman spends every day of their lives pounding rice, okay? So if they took the rice to have it hulled, then that liberates the women a lot. There's a well. This is a sewing room that we electrified so that the chief's wife could teach young women how to sew and not buying, stuff from China. Bategeya, those were tools, and this Asia, he's going down in the well. And so anyway, in conclusion, we stand for building infrastructure and providing competence, okay? Because charity might make you feel good. It makes them feel good for a very short amount of time. But if you want something to last, I think of it as like water falling in the desert. If water falls in the desert, you know what happens to it? Within seconds, it evaporates. That's the way charity is. But if you do structural changes and you work with people and you send your children there and they send their children here, then you have a very different relationship with people in the third world. And that's what, the Peace Corps stood for when JFK, one of the best things JFK ever did was starting the Peace Corps. I have had 2 of my students in the Peace Corps. I think they do they really have it right, And there's a lot of people, are being taught this now, that you need to work on infrastructure and work on competence and making sure the thing is going to stand the test of time. Anyway, so that's all I have to say. And
John, we have about 2 minutes, so if any questions?
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions.
Yeah. I love your sustainability. Your project sounds amazing. I was just in Uganda with a Rotary project, and I didn't see any small farms. I saw gardens in the villages, in individuals, but everyone in the villages worked for corporate farms that had 7,000 employees that were Indian or Chinese. I didn't see farms like you're talking about.
Yeah, that's because you were in East Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Mozambique's the same way. I mean, there was a big story about Brazilians coming in, and everybody has to leave. They've been living in those villages all there for generations, and they're out. And then the big Brazilians come in. They do their farming. The land is sucked dry, and then they leave. And then the land has been ruined. I mean, and actually there was a story put out by a nonprofit in Oakland about Princeton, Harvard, Dartmouth, their retirement systems making money off of throwing people out of their villages and building giant corporate farms. So, like, I don't want my retirement money destroying the people's lives. That is happening. And unfortunately, the news media doesn't tell you about it, but it's happening. And, the National Geographic, before it got bought up by Rupert Murdoch, used to have stories like that. And they had a story about how Brazil was coming in and buying up in Mozambique as a Portuguese-speaking country. Yeah, that's a big problem in East Africa. Yeah, but I believe that small farms don't. Well, the cocoa business is small farm business. They say plantations, in the news media. That's because the news media has never been there, so they don't know. So when you read a story, most likely it's going to have a lot of falsehoods in it, because they don't bother to spend money to send people there, and even if they did, it takes a long time to figure out what's going on. But in West Africa, the small village is still there, and very much producing and doing what small villages do. And my idea is, I believe that we should not corporatize everything and everybody become a tool of a corporation. I believe that I think the American ideal is that every person has a right to make their own life and not to be the tool of a large company. I believe that the small farm has a place in this world, and we don't need to spend, whether it happens or not. It might happen that eventually the cocoa tree will be totally re-engineered. So you just bring robots in, and this is robot stuff. Your entire food that you eat is robot. The entire American food industry is based on robots. I mean, it used to be that people they slaughtered. There were people called butchers who slaughtered meat, and then it was people from the prisons, and now a lot of it is totally mechanized. Those are things that are happening, but right now in West Africa, the village is still doing well.
Any other questions for Tom? Tom, thank you so much for coming out. The chocolate